There have been a number of threads and videos on upgrading a 6.0 transmission pan and filter to the 6.4 version. This is my story of the change. At this point, my truck is 13 years old with 200,000 miles. The transmission has always had its external filter and fluid changed every 30,000 miles. It sees mostly commuter driving, but I do tow either a 6,000-pound or 10,000-pound trailer. The last transmission service was 25,000 miles ago, and I've towed the trailers about 4,000 miles of that, typical for what I do. People call the 6.0 transmission filter a rock catcher, while the external paper roll filter does the real filtering work. I had never changed the pan filter as it's not in the maintenance schedule, and the external filter certainly appears to have excellent filtering ability. One recent discussion on FTE about fluid changes migrated into an upgrade pan and filter thread. As the conversation progressed, it was mentioned when the transmission got to 165 degrees Fahrenheit normal driving temperature, the transmission thermostat allowed most of the fluid to go through the cooler and then 10% through the filter. No problem, pretty normal, except for me. When I've monitored my transmission temperature, it takes some work for me to get to 150 degrees Fahrenheit and 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. Of course, then, I needed to prove that. 10 miles out. 40 miles out. 100 miles out. 160 miles out. Back home, 200 miles. And a 38-mile drive on a cooler day. Now I'm looking into plumbing a flow meter into the cab so I can check the volume of fluid running through the coolers and the filter. But I need to figure out what size flow meter to get, so I check the service manual to see if it states the flow volume. And it has a really nice table. When you plot out the information, you get a graph like this, indicating very little filter flow in red. You would really have to be around 180 degrees Fahrenheit to get real-time filtering capacity. If we calculate flow and time, it's not so bad. It takes a little over an hour for all the pan volume to go through the filter, 2 hours of driving for all the fluid in the transmission. It still means dirty fluid is being circulated. And as Mark has pointed out, the spools are very sensitive to contamination. I've had this pan and filter sitting on a shelf for 6 months. Time to get moving. I used my 14-quart bucket from McMaster that I've had for a dozen years. It works great under the truck for oil and transmission fluid changes as it's not as tall as a 5-gallon bucket, and it keeps splash to a minimum. I started draining in the evening to let all the fluid drip out before removing the pan the next day. I had a hard time getting this little filter seal out of my transmission case. It definitely wanted to stay after 13 years and 200,000 miles. No matter how I tried, it just stuck in there, until I made this tool with 3/8 threaded rod. The washer was fitted so the rolled, non-sharp edge of the punched washer would be pulling against the bore. This prevents any scratches to the bore, as this is a critical seal. Some of the transmission bolts were a little hard to get out. They developed corrosion by way of galvanic action to the aluminum case over the years. This was easily remedied with a wire brush and anti-seize for the next pan dropping in 60,000 miles. There's not that much difference between the original and upgraded pan, just dimensional changes for the bigger filter assembly. And I put a label on the pan for the next time I do a filter change. The gasket is a reusable silicone design. It's reinforced with wire and kept from excessive compression by standoffs at each bolt hole, basically engineered compression. Without adhesive, it can become displaced when you're installing the gasket and pan into place. I use several nylon wire ties to hold it in position while several bolts are started in nearby holes. The wire tie loop is then cut and removed before it is compressed. 3 ties did the job. With both pan designs, the drain plug is higher than the filter reservoir. So when you are doing the 6.0 design level maintenance, unless you drop the pan, you will never get out the last quart of fluid, or clean the debris that may be resting at the bottom of the pan. Switching to the 6.4 design level pan, if you do follow the filter change routine rather than just a drain, you'll get all this fluid and see what is accumulating in the bottom of the pan. However, with the 6.0 level design, you could go above the scheduled maintenance and drop the pan, which would be an added benefit, getting out more fluid and better inspection. As many have noted, the design of the two filter assemblies are totally different. The 6.0 filter is made by FilterTech and the 6.4 by Band. This new 6.4 liter pleated filter has a substantial increase in filter area due to the pleat's width and height, which would be necessary with a finer filtering surface to maintain the same volume of fluid going through the filter. And a closer visual of the used 6.0 filter shows it's not quite the rock catcher that it has the reputation to be. With the finer filtering media of the 6.4 filter, Ford designed protection if the filter clogs and becomes too restrictive and would starve the pump. At the end of the filter is a coarser screen with an underlying valve to open under high suction conditions. However, this screen is not as fine as the 6.0 filter screen. With the fluid dumped out of the old pan, it doesn't look that bad. The magnetic ring that encircles the drain plug certainly had magnetic particles attached, which would not be removed under the normal 6.0 drain and refill procedure. This is after 200,000 miles of driving, and by no means can I interpret if this quantity is normal, low, or excessive. The external 6.0 paper roll filter was changed and replaced at this time as well. Although with the upgrade it could be removed, I'm keeping the existing filtration. The coloration is no different than what I remember seeing over the years, and there is no debris on its surfaces. The O-ring for the filter canister seals perpendicular to the filter, basically being squeezed side to side. Therefore, it's not necessary to torque down the canister shell to any great value. I just tighten it hand tight, which gets it to the stated 120 to 180 inch-pounds value. I just mentioned that the bottom of the 6.0 pan looked fine, and so did the remote filter. 87 Crew Dooley mentioned not to be scared of what's in the bottom of the pan after all this time, but he did mention opening up the filter. Twice. And that's where things get interesting. I notched the bottom with a hacksaw to break it apart. So let's take a look at the filter screen. I'll start at the lower side of the screen where the input port is, and progress towards the high suction end that feeds directly to the pump. Here we can see the fine mesh of the screen, preventing these particles from being distributed throughout the valve body and rest of the transmission. And now the top side of the element, again from inlet port to pump draw up. Since my filter's housing split, I didn't draw out all the debris with the interior sealing O-ring at the end of the element. So here is what was in there. Many vehicles on the road today are scheduled that the transmission fluid is installed for the life of the vehicle. With this commercially designed transmission, Ford scheduled fluid changes every 30,000 miles in order to remove debris retained in the fluid not caught by the filter, which in this case shows the filter works well. But after 5 years of production, Ford determined it was worth the cost of new dies to stamp out a redesigned pan to accommodate a redesigned filter. They must have had a reason. Looking at the macro images, it's real easy to freak out about the material in the filter, but in context over 200,000 miles, it really wasn't that much. Thanks for watching.